All right.
What did you say?
Okay.
Oh, she opened up the webinar.
Okay. Folks, settle in. So your daughter's violin would have been nice.
Yeah.
Let me check over here.
Good morning, folks. We're gonna leave a few minutes to allow additional participants to jump on, so we will start shortly.
By the way, I do have a couple people who let me know ahead of time that they could not make the hour, but they registered so that they can get the video playback.
Okay, great.
So we're gonna hit a much bigger group than what will actually join with us today. So.
Oh, okay, good. Like I was telling Janice, I wrote this talk, but on the Zoom thing,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a sense if you're connecting or not. So let's just go through the talk to the end. I have like 35 or 40 minutes. Hopefully I don't run over or get too short. And then we'll feel it out with the questions at the end. I guess we'll do the however you want to do it. Either you can read me the chat questions or we can patch people through. And then maybe we can follow up some other way, email or something.
Great.
Absolutely. That
2
works.
more minutes and we'll get started. I have a couple of other folks that just joined us. Welcome. We will be starting in 2 minutes. Giving a few minutes for folks to jump on. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Business as Unusual. My name is Janice Contreras. I'm the Executive Director of the Northeast Ohio Hispanic Center for Economic Development. It's Friday. We are excited. It is Juneteenth. So definitely we want to commemorate the significance and the historic element of this day that has kind of been skipped from American history, but definitely bringing back and doing a lot of work around educating folks around what this day is. So definitely take some time today in remembrance of what it means and how it relates to the content of what's happening in our country right now. As you guys know, I see a lot of folks that have been participating consistently. Our weekly Business as Unusual, our goal is to be able to bring you relevant content related to how to keep your business afloat, how to thrive, how to survive COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic. Each week we bring content that we have gotten feedback on, or folks have mentioned that it's a need, or just kind of where we're at on this process, right? It's been 12 long weeks with a lot of different elements on it. And so we've tried to change our topics on whatever is relevant or what is pressing now. We know that a lot of our businesses have been able to open or are working on opening at some capacity, maybe not at 100%, but definitely trying to get there. And so we are definitely here for you, and we'll be doing a lot more to ensure that we're supporting you. So without further ado, actually, I'm going to turn it over to our director of our Small Business Development Center, Randy Cedeño, who will then introduce our speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. As Janice mentioned, I am the director at the Small Business Development Center, and I'm going to make a quick, short announcement en español. Si necesitas asistencia, si necesitas traducción, si necesita que le ayudemos de alguna forma, por favor de indicarlo antemano. Va a ser un poco difícil poder traducir en vivo por la sencilla razón de que hay mucho contenido, pero haremos lo posible para ayudarle. Inclusive van a recibir una copia del seminario de hoy, y pues con mucho gusto podemos darle un follow-up si lo desea, pero vas a tener que llamar o enviarnos un correo electrónico para poder facilitar el tiempo. So back to English. So it is a great privilege and honor to introduce to some of you guys a good friend that I met back, I think it's been about 10, 11 years now.
Yeah, maybe so.
Yeah, about 10, 11 years ago, and Todd really impacted my life. I was in college, and he was actually talking about the exact same, in certain terms, subject. We were talking about contracts specifically, and entertainment contracts at that time, and I will never forget that time. So we've had a relationship. Obviously, life, keeps you occupied, and family and life changes. But Todd, thank you so much. He is a great friend to the community. He lives in our community. He's done so much work for this community specifically. And so he is sold out just for the community, just as we are for you guys. So Todd, thank you from the bottom of my heart, and from our team and the entire staff. Thank you so much for coming in and doing this and helping us out, giving us some understanding, some knowledge. And so Todd is a lawyer, and he is currently with Seeley, Savage, Ebert, and Garage. I hope I said that correctly. It is a mouthful. But nonetheless, Todd will give you some more information. I'm sure he'll have his contact information at some point. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Todd, because I know there's quite some information to cover. So Todd, thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Randy, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and to participate with you. I felt like Randy said, we met years ago at a talk like this, and he was always so enthusiastic and engaged. And every time our paths cross over the years, Randy's doing something new, something more to help people, help the community, and shine his light throughout our community. And it's always beautiful to catch up with you again. So thank you. I so appreciate it. Like you said, I'm a lawyer in Cleveland. I'm working now in Westlake for a firm called Seeley Savage. I'm glad to be able, I do business law and employment law and I work with a lot of privately held businesses and nonprofits. So commercial leasing is definitely part of a business life that is something I've been working on for years. And um, on the I understand that we're mostly talking about the entrepreneurial side today, and so the way that business owners and new business owners, especially as you're planning your business, as you think about commercial leasing, as you think about this commitment that your business is going to engage in, there are certain issues that you need to focus on, and I'd like to cover those today. And as we talk about in the time of COVID-19, it's there. COVID-19 is stressing everybody, and what happens as it creates a stress on commercial leasing is that elements in the lease that we might not have thought of before become more critical. So I'm going to go over some of the basic elements of commercial leasing, and at the end we'll talk about how COVID affects that stuff. I'm going to try to share my screen here because I have a PowerPoint. Are you seeing my PowerPoint screen yet? Nope, not yet. Hold on. Oh, you are, right? You can see it. Yes? Okay. 1 second. Dang it. I have an animation here. I'm trying to get it to work. Oh, there we go. Okay, that was that was the highlight of my presentation. All right. So, as the first thing I want to say is that, and that a technical disclaimer is that this is not legal advice. This is general information. If you need specific advice on your lease, you should call a lawyer. This is a general overview. It's not specific advice, and this doesn't create legal representation. All right. So the general point, the first point I think is that commercial leases are contracts. They are agreements. People think, oh, I have this lease. It's, it has some magic power, or the lease is supposed to say something. The lease is a formal written agreement, a business agreement. It's a contract, and the formality of it, the power of it, means that it can be enforced in court. So a contract law applies, and it's basically an agreement. So whatever you say you're going to do, the court can enforce. You don't have to take terms as they're given to you. You can negotiate them to the best you can, and so that is something that I think is a first line fact that you should start with. It's not magic. The next thing is that commercial leases can seem like very authoritarian. They can seem oppressive. They can seem imbalanced. And the reason is that commercial leases are very different from residential leases. In residential leases, there are fairness laws so that landlords have to have certain obligations to residential tenants so that tenants are not treated so unfairly. Contract law treats commercial leases much differently. Even if you have an unfair lease, if you are the tenant, you are expected to have the business sophistication and the type of sophistication sufficient to enter into this agreement. So if you enter into an unfair agreement or an agreement that has unfavorable terms for you, and your landlord enforces those terms against you, you can't defend it by saying, boy, that's not fair, I didn't know. You are a commercial tenant, your business, and you're going to be expected to have understood and agreed specifically to the enforcement of that lease. So on a residential side where you can say, that wasn't fair, I didn't get notice, I didn't get all this stuff. In a commercial lease, you're not going to have that. You're not going to have an equivalent amount of a defense that way. And so negotiation's important. There's a principle in contracts called bargaining power, which is that the person with the leverage can have more favorable terms. Often, as a smaller tenant for a bigger landlord, you're going to have less bargaining power. You're going to have to accept less favorable terms. And in that, because that's true, it's up to you to read the lease, to understand it, and to understand whether the risk and the terms of the lease are acceptable for your business. You may say, in the form of my business, depending on what kind of business I have, the terms of this lease are going to make it too hard for me in year one. Or you're going to say, my seasonal business is, I have all my income in one part of the year and all the lease obligations are in another part of the year. That's not going to work for me. So understanding your agreement and understanding that in the context of your business, I can't stress that enough. Okay. So what normally happens when you're a business, you say, okay, here's my business, and you find a place, you look at the space, and your landlord says, here's the lease. And commercial leases can be surprising. And the reason is that the strictest, most difficult lease for a commercial tenant is generally the large shopping center lease. It can be 50 pages long. It can have so many different provisions. It can be so complicated. And then, so that's on one end. On the other end of the spectrum is a lease that you might get if you lease an office from your uncle who just says, just sign here. All I need to do is, you just agree to pay me a certain amount of rent. If you fall back, he's not going to enforce on you. There's no such thing as a standard lease. The agreement is the agreement. And even if you get a very onerous, difficult lease, those things should be up for negotiation, and you have to read them. You don't have to take them as a standard lease. If someone hands you something and says, this is our standard lease, it means either they don't care to spend the money on negotiating with you, or they're just trying to get unfavorable terms on you. I have to say, for smaller landlords, sometimes they will use a lease that they got from somewhere else, otherwise known as the internet. They don't understand it. They may not have read it, or it may be a Xerox that the person they bought the business from used in 1986, and they don't have the ability, or they don't want to spend for a lawyer to negotiate it. That's no excuse. You got to read that lease. There are common issues of leasing, and there are common forms of leasing, and we're going to cover those today. So again, I want to stress that you have to pick the terms that are most important. Pick the lease that's most important to your business. So before you get a lease, hopefully, what makes it easier, before you get the 50-page lease, you'll get something called a term sheet. You'll ask the landlord for a term sheet, and that'll be like either a bullet-pointed list or a little table of issues, and it'll outline the basic terms of the lease. And these are some of the things to check first. All right, first thing, who is going to be the tenant? If you have a business doing something, there's of course you as an individual, and then there should be a business entity that you formed, your LLC or something like that. Sometimes if you are in the process of forming a business, you get a lease and you end up signing it as yourself. I'm going to form a business that's a restaurant. Let's say I'm starting to form an LLC. I'm talking to someone about it. It's not quite done yet. I don't have my partners there. But someone says, hey, I want you to sign this lease. And I say, okay, and I sign it, Todd Masuda. The business goes in, something goes wrong. Who's on the hook for that lease? Well, now it's me, myself. That was the initial error of signing personally. The issue is when you form your entity, you do business as that entity, you sign the lease as that entity. In the world of your business, the lease is going to be a significant obligation, especially depending on the form of your business. If you are if the facility is important for the conduct of your business, your restaurant, your store, your retail, you've got to make sure that the tenant is your business and not you. Okay. Next is the landlord. I talked about bargaining power. You should think about what your bargaining power with the landlord is. Is it like, for instance, your uncle, which would be very easy to negotiate terms, or is it a corporate entity out of state that uses a national management agreement where you are just one of hundreds of thousands of tenants and your terms are very difficult to negotiate? Normally, you don't have that much, once it's done, it's done. But one of the things that have really come into play with COVID is you have to have a good ability to communicate with your landlord. He has to know or she has to know who you are, and you have to know who they are in order to be able to talk and figure out some kind of accommodation if your business is stressed. So in the lease, the tenant is going to be defined and the landlord's going to be defined. Take a minute to make sure those are correct. And take a minute to make sure that the signature block is correct too, so the right person signs. Next, you may be moving into a space. Someone will hand you a lease, say this is a lease for the space. Check to make sure the premises are right and what the premises are. You're going to lease a certain space that you're allowed to do business in. But the premises will also include common areas, shared areas. There may be parking, there may be a lobby, there may be recreational facilities, some kind of other facilities, or like a cafeteria in the or basement space, storage space. Make sure all of those things are outlined and defined in the lease. It seems obvious, but sometimes, with landlords copying leases and stuff, you can sign a lease for someone else's space because they forgot to change something. They forgot to change the definition of the space. So be very careful about that. Rent is one of the most difficult things in a commercial lease, and it is so different from the residential idea of rent. It is more like the idea of a mortgage. A commercial lease will give you rent for the whole period. Let's say you pay $5,000 a month for 3 years. The rent will not say $5,000 a month. It's going to say it's going to say $60,000 for 3 years, which means $180,000 commitment for the term of that lease. That means on day one, you're on the hook for that. So that's the base rent calculation that you have to be careful of, especially because the first thing that happens when you default a commercial lease is that that whole amount becomes due at once. You're no longer paying monthly rent. That whole rent for the term becomes due. The spectrum of commercial leases also adds in a lot of other types of rent or other costs. And if you're not accustomed to them, you're going to see them as hidden costs, but really these are conventions of commercial leasing. CAM is common area maintenance. Like I said, in the premises, there may be a lobby or parking or something like that. The landlord may be charging a fee, kind of like a condo maintenance fee, on top of your base rent, on top of your minimum rent, for those common areas. And the lease may not give you an amount. It may say the landlord is just going to take it at the end of the year and divide it up among the tenants. So if you don't know how much that is, or you don't have a feeling for how much that is, it's important to find that out if you're on the hook for CAM. Net rent, there's a principle in commercial leasing called triple net or net leasing. That means that the landlord is going to charge you extra for generally taxes, insurance, and then expenses. I think, there's some debate about what the triple net really is, but a net lease means that you can expect to see some extra costs. And the lease should say what that is. And generally it'll say you have to pay you're going to have an extra fee based on the landlord's previous year's taxes, insurance, or something else. And it generally it won't say what that amount is, so you have to ask, what was the 2019 insurance and taxes? How much extra did everyone have to pay? Because that will be prorated into your lease. The most challenging provision, I think, in a commercial lease, and that is very common in shopping center leases, is the idea of percentage rent, which means that not only do you pay your minimum rent and a maintenance fee and the landlord's taxes and insurance and stuff, you have to give them a percentage of your revenue for the year. So be aware of that. And then there will often be a provision for additional rent, and additional rent will mean things like costs incurred because of you. You had a leak, it leaked downstairs, and you're supposed to pay some damages. What they're just saying is these other expenses are going to be added on and treated as rent, and they're going to be part of the whole amount that you owe the landlord, and that all of the structure of the lease is going to enforce. So they just want to take all those extra expenses and incorporate them into your obligation there. The next thing to look for is whether there's a holdover rent. Holdover means the time that you stay in the space past your lease. Let's say you have a lease for 3 years. At the end, you say, I want to stay there for a few more months. And the landlord says, sure, you can be there on a month-to-month in accordance with the lease. And the lease will usually say you can go on month-to-month, but it's going to have an increase in rent. So be aware, if you stay on, you can't automatically assume that your rent for the extra months will be the same. Sometimes it will even say the rent is double your last rent. So be alert to that term. And then the term of the lease means how long is the whole lease for? The example I used before was 3 years. A commercial lease will often have options. After 3 years, you can renew for another year or another term, depending, as long as you're not in default of the lease, and as long as it'll say either landlord's option or the tenant's option. But there will also probably be a renewal increase in rent. And if it says that renewal will be determined at the time of the option, that kind of means it's not really an option, because not all the terms are decided. And that is definitely a business choice that you have to make carefully. Let's say you are taking a lease in a neighborhood that's up and coming, and it seems expensive now, maybe $1,500 for the space you get, but you think that, and your term is for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, your rent goes up to $2,500. I think you have to consider, in 3 years, is that $2,500 going to be a good rent, and that I'm going to want to keep this place, or is that something that I should try to negotiate later? So that there's a little bit of, what would you call it? Appetite for risk, or calculations based on your projections for your business and for the premises when you plan your additional terms, lease terms. And the other important things that will affect your business in the lease are not just the payment and the premises part. There will be generally other limitations. For instance, the purpose. If you are in a commercial space with a lot of other tenants and you have a certain kind of business, you may want an exclusivity clause. If you are, let's say, a restaurant, you may want assurance from the landlord that they're not going to have another restaurant in there, or maybe some kind of services. Maybe you're an accountant, maybe you're a bank, maybe you're a other bike shop. And on the flip side of that, there's going to be something that says you can only conduct that certain kind of business. So if you're an accountant, you can't, in year 2 of your lease, open up a bike shop. So next one is hours of business. A lot of malls will tell you that you have to be open certain hours, and the reason is they can't have a mall where everyone else is open and one store is dark. That's a killer for the landlord. So you're going to be in breach of your lease if you can't stay open all of that time, and that's difficult for businesses that are stressed. That's difficult for businesses that have a challenge meeting payroll, especially payroll when you can't operate at full capacity full time. If you have to reduce operations or that is a risk in your business, you should see if there is a hours of business clause in your lease. And abandonment is there because if you don't meet those hours of business, the lease may say you're deemed to have abandoned your lease and defaulted on that. Almost every commercial lease will have a set of rules and regulations. It'll talk about when you can use the premises. It'll talk about who can be there, when. There'll be limits on signs, or they'll say you can't have external signs, or you need approval. All of that stuff for the conduct of your business is important to see, because you may plan to put a sign on the roof, but that's not allowed. Or you may have a sign from your existing business that you want to bring over, and that's not allowed. And restore to the original state is a provision to look out for. When you lease a place, a commercial lease is often what's called a vanilla box or white box lease. You're going to go in there, there's going to be a cement floor and white paint, and you put in everything else. You build the walls, you put the register, you hang the lights, you do all this stuff. The lease may say that at the end of the lease, you have to return the premises in original condition. If your lease says that, when you're leaving the lease, that may end up being a significant cost for you. So depending on the kind of business you have, look at that return of the premises clause to make sure that makes sense for you. And the last thing on this sheet is something called SNDA. And these are terms that are in most leases, and they provide for the landlord's relationship to its lender. And one of the reasons that commercial leases are so strict on tenants is because the landlord itself, it's not that the landlord itself is trying to take advantage of all the tenants, but the landlord has borrowed a lot of money to put into this project and is at a lot of risk for its own loans, for its own bank, for its own mortgage. And so the lender will have the landlord put in things that say the lender can step in and take over the lease, and the tenant is not going to complain. That's what those subordination and attornment mean. The subordination means all of the tenant's rights are subordinate to the bank's, the landlord's bank, and attornment means that you accept the bank as your landlord if that happens. Non-disturbance protects the tenant and says that if the bank takes over the landlord's building, if the tenant is up to date on the lease, the bank's not going to bother you. These, each one of these we can go into more detail, but let me push it up here. So these are the real risks on the lease. Those are previously those are the general terms where you understand your deal. These are the things where the contract shifts the risk or shifts the costs onto the tenant, and these are the heads-up items. One is the personal guarantee. Early on, I said you want to have the business be the tenant. Well, at the end of the lease, there may well be a personal guarantee that says, oh, okay, Todd, your restaurant is the tenant, but every single obligation under the lease, we want Todd Masuda individually to be liable for. And, unless you have a lot of bargaining power, that's often a difficult one to get out of because it's so conventional. Next is the security deposit. The security deposit is very much like a residential security deposit. So that is it's just an allocated cost. The amount of the security deposit can really vary, and you can maybe negotiate the security deposit with the personal guarantee. Maybe they ask for 3 months security and a personal guarantee. You negotiate with by saying, look, I'm giving you the guarantee. Will you take 1 month security? And that will save you on the upfront cash. No liens will often it's mostly a risk if you are building out your own space and hiring your own construction company, you have to make sure that your construction contract gets paid, and that your contractor doesn't put a lien on you, because that will often be in violation of your lease. That's also probably going to be a condition of your mortgage, and the tension between the tenant's bank, the tenant's mortgage, or the tenant's bank loan, and the lease is also something that every business has to weigh. Your bank loan will say you can't have any liens on your construction, and the lease will say you can't have any liens on your construction. So you have to manage that contractor very well. One of the key risks to look out for is repair or replace the utilities and systems, especially the HVAC. HVAC is very expensive. So if you go into a place, and so it's normal for a tenant to have to fix things like, oh, your refrigerator goes down, your sink goes down, you got to call the plumber. Your lights go out, you need new bulbs. All those things are your regular repair and maintenance functions. But the things that the risk comes in, even for HVAC, if you need HVAC service, maybe you should be the one who has to call and have annual maintenance. You have to contract with the air conditioning guy to come out and look at the system every year. The real risk cost is, the risk allocation is for replacement, and that's just a word that's stuck in there, tenant's obligation to repair and replace. Well, if you are renting a place for 3 years and the building's 20 years old and there's a $75,000 HVAC unit on top of that building and it goes out while you're the tenant, suddenly you've agreed to replace that whole unit. And that's it. So be very careful about that risk, because it sneaks in there with one word, replacing the systems. Environmental risks can be very expensive. So make sure that you may be renting a building that might have been a gas station before, or might have been a dry cleaner where there's an environmental risk. You should see what the remediation obligation is in the lease. And if you are a gas station or you are a dry cleaner, that is a provision that's going to have to be negotiated very carefully. And I think the point is that you want to be able to say you can be responsible for the harm you've caused, but you don't want to be on the hook for environmental damages that other people have caused, because that's can be a crushing expense. I know I'm running out of time. How am I doing, Janice?
You are definitely running out of time. So
Okay.
I don't have much more time left. It'll take about 5 more minutes if you
Okay. Let me say that insurance is going to be a very important part of dealing with your lease. Having a good insurance agent and being able to talk about coverages, different kinds of coverages for these risk allocations, business interruption insurance, indemnification insurance, contractual insurance, insuring the systems is going to be important. And then the next thing is to look carefully at the default provisions. If you are in danger of your lease, does it all happen at once? And how harsh is it? Do you have a grace period? Does the landlord have to give you notice? Is there someone to negotiate with? Do you go into mediation? Do you go into arbitration? There's going to be a section of landlord remedies, and they will generally be just a muddle of things the landlord can do. So be aware of those. On the flip side, the good incentives you can negotiate for are free rent. For instance, if if the landlord really wants to get you in, you may be able to get a period of rent free. Next is building out the space or renovating it. Sometimes the landlord will do it. That's called build to suit. And sometimes they'll give you some money to do it. They may give you cash or they may give you a rent break. So see how much that is and see if you actually end up paying it on the back end. Sometimes that happens. Okay, so on the COVID-19 stuff, businesses are totally stressed, and it's not only tenants, it is the landlords and the banks as well. And for the tenant who's kind of on the the bottom of the chain, the good news is that landlords are willing to negotiate because they don't necessarily have someone better to come in. And there have been, the economy took such a dip that the governor, I think in April, issued this order. It's not really an order, it's a suggestion that landlords and tenants defer payments and interest. I think through the end of July or through the end of August, and be kind to each other about payments. And what I've seen is that some do and some don't. And I think it depends on whether the landlord is able to afford to give the tenant a break. So again, knowing your landlord is important. There's PPP loans. Those will have gone through your bank, and those have terms that that's something that's become available to landlords. And then if it comes to defaulting or negotiating a new, I typed loan provisions. What I really meant is loan and lease provisions. There's going to be a provision called force majeure that will be important, which means that it's for acts of God or conditions outside of everyone's control. May forgive certain things in your loan or in your lease. And then finally, if you do change the lease, get an easier lease, that's done with an amendment, and that is an amendment to your agreement. Boy, that was a little sprint at the end. I'm sorry I couldn't cover that more carefully, and I'm sorry I'm not so good with the time.
No apologies at all. It's a lot of really good information. Actually, I learned a whole lot from this session. So I think it's definitely very relevant information and important for anybody that has ever negotiated anything, because it's crazy how many people do sign these things and don't understand what triple net or CAM or a lot of these small details. So thank you for the content. Our audience has been quite quiet on chat today, so I hope everyone is doing well. I definitely want to provide just a couple of minutes. If anyone has a question or comment for Todd, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and shoot your question. So I'll leave a few minutes for that. We're unusually quiet.
Yeah. Crickets.
I know, you guys are really quiet today. Okay, well, we still have a few more minutes. So, there goes one. Hello, George.
Hello, George.
Good to see we have two Georges on the lines. Three Georges, I think.
Three Georges. Three Georges.
Friday George Day. Nice to see familiar names because we can't see.
Was there something
on the chat box? No, it was just a hello, or just let us know that they're still there. Okay, we'll still have a couple minutes. So if anybody has something, definitely shoot it. I think we'll run through some updates really quickly as we do every Friday. So Randy, you got 2 minutes.
So thanks again, Todd, for your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
Very quickly, guys, know what the heck you're signing. Bottom line, if you don't know what you're signing, get the help. That is important. As you can see, the provisions that can be in that contract can really do a number on you. So understand what you're signing. Next thing that I basically have 2 reminders basically. So PPP runs out June 30th. June 30th is the last day to apply. If you have not applied, apply today. I'm actually working with a person as of yesterday who has not applied. So we are running at the moment to make this happen. Also, EIDL has been opened, so you no longer have to be just an agricultural business. You can apply for your EIDL. Just remember that you will only qualify for $1,000 per employee that is in the business. Okay, if you need help, our office is open. Our doors are closed. We're not open to the public, but we are definitely working hands-on with clients. And so if you need help, you should be calling today, so that we can put you on the schedule and make this help you make these moves fairly quickly here, guys. So I think that's all I got. Once again, Todd, thank you so much. Thank you for every time we get together. It's always a good time, and you just always bring good stuff, man. Thank you so much. Say hi to the family for me.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. It's my pleasure. Thanks to everyone. And you should be getting a PDF handout, I think. That's just like the notes version of these slides. So I hope that's helpful. I really appreciate the chance to talk with everyone.
No, it's absolutely helpful. It's very relevant. Like I said, even for us, you always learn something new when you hear these chats. George had a quick question related to PPP. And if you're a single LLC, can you apply for PPP? Absolutely. The answer is absolutely. And time is running out, as Randy said. June 30th is the deadline. So if you need some help, or if you need us to walk you through that, feel free to call the center. The other thing that Randy and the team could do is let you know who's actually still making PPP loans. Some of the banks that are not doing PPP loans anymore, but there's definitely plenty of other folks, CDFIs and other maybe non-traditional lending institutions that are doing PPP loans. So if you go to your bank and your bank tells you, no, we're no longer doing it, it's not because there's not funding available. They're just not doing them anymore. So definitely shop it out. And if you want some guidance on where to go, definitely contact us. And also, I know that a few weeks ago, we had Luis Cartagena come on, and he was talking about what are the requirements, what are the reporting requirements, and so forth. As we know, PPP can be 100% forgivable, but there's a but there, absolutely, on making sure that you are providing the proper documentation. It's not a whole lot. It's not as complicated, so please don't be intimidated by that. Right now, apply, and we will figure out then how to make sure, as long as you apply for the correct things, you're fine. Payroll, health insurance, leases, those are things that definitely are covered under PPP, with 75% needing to be payroll.
Yeah, the only thing you need to remember for everyone who still wants to apply is that you have to have been in business before February 28th, 2020. All right, and if you have been in business for a month before that, we can still apply. We just can't guarantee anything. But you have to have been in business before February 28th, 2020.
Yes, and absolutely, with all of our business as unusuals, Maria will do a follow-up, and a thank you for participating. So you will get the recording. So definitely, I know it's a lot of content and a lot of detailed content, so you will have access to the recording along with the slides and the notes that Todd has made available. Definitely share it too with anyone else. And we know we have a couple of clients that I was texting while we were on here, like, hey, you should have been on this call. Make sure you catch the recording. So definitely do that and share with anybody that you think is relevant. So we're almost to the end here. One of the things that we wanted to talk about or announce. We know that some of you guys have been totally followers and loyalists of Business as Unusual. We are trying to gauge participation and gauge, making sure that we have a good turnout for these. It does take a lot of time for us to bring speakers, coordinate with the staff to make it happen. And so we know a lot of things have changed, right? A lot of businesses are open now. 11 o'clock on a Friday might not be the best time to maximize participation. So I think our team is going to take some time to think through that and figure out what the best time is. We definitely want your feedback. Let us know what works. If there's a more convenient time, definitely let us know if there's specific topics of relevancy or anything that you're struggling with, or that you see your peers, that you see entrepreneurs going through. Definitely. I mean, a lot of what we want to do is preventative. We don't want to wait till businesses are, in debt for 6 months and drowning or need to file bankruptcy before, because I think there's a lot of things that we can do. There's a lot of opportunities right now, but it's definitely a timing game. And so I think as specifically businesses and entrepreneurs of color, sometimes we are too embarrassed or too humble in a way to ask for help or to do some negotiations, as Todd was teaching us. So it's really important that we are our own advocates for our businesses. And obviously you have the support of the center to walk you through that and let you know what we can do or cannot.
I think that's a great point, Janice. And you have your business and you have your aspiration, you have your plan, you have this vision. But because of the new stresses, because of the new uncertainty, doesn't mean you can't do it. It means that you have to break it down into the little parts and see where's the core, what can you keep, and what parts do you have to let go so that you can still have your business, you still have your dream, you still have your activity, and you still do the good work that you plan to do.
Absolutely. Some of the things that you'll start seeing actually today and Monday is an announcement of our Neighborhood Grows program. Growing retail opportunities with strategy is what GROW stands for. And so this is always a popular training for us and one that we haven't done in a while. Plus we're doing it virtually. So a lot of elements that we have going on with this, and definitely a lot of planning on the part of the team. So Neighborhood Grows is for businesses that are housed or located within the fabric of a neighborhood, right? Or entrepreneurs that seek to have a business within a neighborhood, right? So it's very specific to, hyper local to specific neighborhoods. It doesn't have to be Clark Fulton. It could be within any neighborhood. The context of a neighborhood, obviously, we have a commitment to the Clark Fulton neighborhood. But anybody that's interested in having a business again, or has a business already established, should go through the GROWS program. We are going to do a session in Spanish. So July, we will be doing that in Spanish, and in August, we will be doing it in English. It'll be 2 weeks, 2 sessions. It'll be Monday and Wednesday for 2 hours. So 2 is what you need to remember. And so we only have 15 slots per session. And they're going fast. So we urge folks, if you're interested in the GROWS program, register as soon as possible. If you know others that will be interested in GROWS, definitely do that. And the sweet treat at the end is that we currently have 2 vacant spaces in our business incubator at Las Tienditas del Mercado. We have 2 openings to add 2 businesses to the incubator. And so it is a requirement to go through Neighborhood Grows in order to be eligible to apply, right? We want to make sure that all of our business owners have at least a foundation, an education foundation around starting and establishing a business. So look for that information, share the information, and obviously if there's anybody that's interested, again, we recommend that they jump on it quickly as space is limited. Randy, did I miss anything? Anything else that we have?
The only thing is we have QuickBooks coming out pretty soon. It will be, I think it's the 1st or 2nd week of July. I'm sorry, I don't have the date at the top of my mind, but pay attention. We will make sure to push that out through social media.
Excellent. Well, thank you to everyone for participating again. Happy Friday, happy Juneteenth, and definitely have a good weekend, and we will see you soon. Thanks again.
Thanks. Keep up your good work. Happy
Thank
Juneteenth,
you so much.
everybody. All righty.
Take care.